Just another religion. Just another ism. That's all. I was not trying to prove it. I was trying to disprove it. That's what I was trying to do. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. My first problem was this. I could document, I could prove with archaeology that the Tanakh, the Old Testament, was written centuries before Jesus Christ was born. You could go to the British Museum, they would verify it. It was written centuries. The second problem I had was that unlike Nostradamus, the predictions in the Old Testament were literal. They weren't vague. They weren't how you interpret it or what you want to make out of it. It said too many direct things. For instance, 800 years, nearly 1,000 years before Jesus was born, there was someone called King David. And in the 22nd Psalm, which any rabbi could tell me was written long before Jesus was born, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Okay, but Jesus could have said that. Then it begins describing a crucifixion. Verse 7, all who see me sneer at me. They separate the lip, they wag their head. Commit yourself to the Lord, let the Lord rescue him if he delights in him. Verse 14, all my bones are out of joint. When the Turin trial was investigated, they crucified cadavers, dead bodies in France. And that's what happens in a crucifixion. The bones pop out of joint. But then it went on to say, dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers encompass me. They pierce my hands and feet. I count all my bones. They divide my garments among them, and for my raiment they cast lots. Now I could prove that was written over 600 years before this was written. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And when they crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots. They pierced my hands and feet and gambled for my clothes. It wasn't like Nostradamus. This was literal. Then it goes on to say here, they gave me gall to drink. When he was hanging on the cross, they gave him vinegar and gall to drink in Matthew 27, verse 34. But King David said that too. In Psalm 62, that's what he said. King David said, they gave me gall to drink. That's what they gave him. So I had a problem. So I said, well, that was written by people after the time of Jesus trying to make it seem like he fulfilled these predictions. It was staged, like the Passover plots. It was staged, it was put on. How come his own people rejected him? So I read further. Max Demont, the Jewish historian, not a Christian, said that his own people were accepting him in huge numbers well into the 2nd century. And the founders of Christianity were Jews. The two biggest opponents of early Christianity were the Roman government and the Jewish rabbis. So I read what the Roman government wrote, or at least pagan Roman historians, Suetonius, Tacitus, Josephus, who was a Jew who converted to paganism. These people admitted it was common knowledge throughout the Roman Empire that this man rose from the dead. Hundreds of people, hundreds of Jews in different places at different times. Some in Palestine, some in Turkey, some in Greece, some in Italy, some in North Africa, willing to die the cruelest of deaths, even seeing their families murdered, willing to be martyred this way, saying, we saw this man alive after he was dead. And if he rose, he can raise us. We're willing to die for this. You can get a crazy group of people in Waco, Texas. You got to be wacko to go to Waco anyway. To shoot it out with the FBI and die, as I pointed out the other night. You can force feed people Kool-Aid down in the jungle in Guyana, like that guy Jim Jones did. But to get hundreds of people in different places at different times, Jewish people willing to die this way, facing these terrible deaths, even seeing their children murdered, I had a problem. But not as big as a problem as when I read what the rabbis wrote about Jesus. As I quoted from the other night, there was something called the Avodat Zarah, written by the rabbis, trying to discourage Jews from believing he was the Jewish Messiah. This was not written by Messianic Jews, not by Hebrew Christians, not by Jews who believed in him. It was written by rabbis trying to persuade other Jews not to believe in him. In the Avodat Zarah, it said, Yeshua HaNotzri, Jesus, did miracles as no other rabbi. He healed the sick. He even raised the dead. And his disciples did miracles in his name. And when he was crucified on Passover, like the New Testament says, when he was crucified, he then ascended into heaven from the Mount of Olives after raising from the dead. That was not written by Jews who believed in him. That was written by Jews who rejected him and were trying to persuade others to reject him. It's one thing when your followers say these things. It's another thing when your enemies say it. It's one thing when those who are trying to persuade people to believe in you say it. It's another thing when those who are trying to persuade people not to believe in you say it. I had a big problem. The prophet Micah chapter 5 verse 2 says, someone who was pre-existent from eternity would be born in Bethlehem. He would be the Messiah. That was 500 years nearly before Jesus was born. Who his ancestors would be, that he would be from the house of David, a descendant of King David. The prophet Zechariah chapter 11 says he would be betrayed by his friend. Not only that, it says the price his friend would betray him for, 30 pieces of silver. No fewer than 7 places. No fewer than 7 places, the prophet Isaiah alone said that this person would cause the Gentiles, the Gentile nations, non-Jews, to believe in the Jewish God. This little nation, Israel, was never anything. Even to this day, there's only 13, 14 million Jews in the world. They're nothing. Yet how come the God of this little country, compared to China, a billion people? People in China believe in this God of the Jews by the tens of millions, despite persecution under the communists. Why is this? I'll tell you why it is. Because it's true. Imagine me saying 800 years from now, somebody was going to be born 800 years from now, where he would be born, who his ancestors would be, that he would be betrayed by his friend, the price his friend would betray him for, that he would die by crucifixion 600 years before it was invented, that Gentiles would gamble for his clothes, that he'd give him gall to drink when he's hanging on the cross, that he'd make the nations of the world believe in the God of the Jews. This guy 800 years from now? Not like Nostradamus, how do you want to interpret it? Literal predictions. I had a problem.